Coming up on the Together for Good podcast, I'm finally interviewing Pastor Gary after a long podcast hiatus. And I wanted to ask him the question I've been asking everyone these days, which is, why are you still here? Why are you still involved in church? He is a man of many stories. I'm looking forward to this. Here we go. Welcome to the Together for Good podcast, a podcast created by Bethany Lutheran Church in Cherry Hills Village, Colorado, and hosted by me, Pastor Nate Preisinger. On Together for Good, our goal is to provide practical, engaging content that supports you without expectations. Whether you're feeling disconnected from traditional religion or simply exploring what faith means in your life, we're here to walk alongside you. No matter where you are on your journey of faith, we're glad you're here. Welcome to Together for Good. Well, Pastor Gary, welcome. Long time no see.
Thanks, Pastor Nate. In fact, I can't remember if the last time we were in studio or if we were in the car.
Driving in the car.
Getting coffee.
It has been far too long. I apologize. That's on me for not booking you sooner, but this is the perfect time to bring you in because, as you know, we've been doing this whole series, talking with people about why they chose to stay in church, just because I feel like, I'm guessing you see it the way I do too. I feel like we hear so much as pastors about people leaving the church.
Right.
And there's so many books being written and so much research and articles. And it's kind of depressing and sort of annoying too, because I don't feel like that's our reality here at Bethany.
Right.
In a lot of ways. Let's just start there. Like, how do you notice that as well? Just this constant narrative that everyone's leaving?
There certainly is, because people keep also talking about trend lines. And so some people are looking at a trend line and even saying 2052 is the year that no one will go to church anymore because they assume this trend won't have a breaking point.
Yeah.
That's not true about trends. All trends have a bottom and they have a cycle back up.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so we're in a downward trend right now, no doubt about it. But not only do we hear it in church, but you know that we both have worked at seminaries.
Yes.
And you worked in admissions and I worked in mission support for the seminaries, and you get that same narrative too. And we know that it's been a difficult time for our theological schools, but that also just continues to create more and more around the narrative. Not only is no one coming to church, but no one's going to seminary. The congregations aren't going to have people to serve them. It feels like a constant flood of a narrative that comes, and yet it's not our daily reality.
No.
The daily reality of God is very, very real and relevant.
Absolutely. Well, and here's what I'm curious about. You knew I was going to get in a dig about your age at some point during this. Like, you've been a pastor for a long time. Has this occurred in other seasons of your ministry career where there's been this narrative, like, look at the trend lines, it's all dropping, or is this sort of a newer phenomenon?
I think this is newer today.
Okay.
I do think that some avenues that came along have increased the sort of the trend line down. You know? We all know the forces of Sunday morning activities, which were really offline at a certain point.
Yeah.
And I always go way back and I attribute it to the fact that at one point when I served in Minnesota, somebody realized that ice time for youth hockey was cheaper on Sunday mornings. And that started the whole expression. That's very, very simplified, but it's also very true.
Yeah.
But it's the sense of what happened with the internet. It's a little bit of just people's lives in general. Busyness has taken over. And I think the church was late in the game of commitment. The other places really had commitment. You had to commit to paying money to play hockey, so you were there, or soccer, or now it's even with band and band camp and so many things like that. There were a lot of commitments that weren't usually made that now other outside forces have made. I mean, I played in band in high school. I don't remember having a fee in the band, but
me either.
When you realized you had people pay a fee, now that created a certain commitment. And I think the church was a little late in that.
Yeah. And thinking about it, I was talking with people about this just the other night, talking with some friends, in that it seems like people want that commitment in different ways. It gives their life meaning and purpose. You hear about these parents who do all of this getting their kids to all sorts of different sports events and traveling all over the place. I was playing basketball on Friday morning and I overheard two people that I was playing with and they were talking like, hey, where were you last week? And the guy's like, oh, I was in Chicago. Like, why were you in Chicago? It's like, my son had a basketball tournament.
Yeah.
And the guy replies like, don't they have basketball teams in Colorado?
Right. And
But
his son's probably 8.
correct.
Right.
Yeah. But there's just something about all this. And I don't think folks even really necessarily question it. It's like, oh, this is just what we have to do. This is just what it means to raise children in America right now is you get them involved
Right.
in all of these traveling sports leagues. And that does give your child purpose and direction, as does the families. Like, no, like this is what we do. And we're going to Toledo this week because that's where the tournament is.
Right. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing, but it does affect.
Yeah.
It affects the family. It does affect the church.
Mhm.
It creates nuances that we either catch up to or ignore.
Right.
And ignoring them is not going to benefit the church in the long run.
No, and I like your point that the church hasn't really gotten on board with this idea of commitment
Right.
as quickly as a lot of the other avenues of life and areas of life.
If we could get rid of that whole grace thing,
Yes.
that would change the narrative.
That's exactly where I was going to go with it. Yeah, right. I think that's part of the problem. Not the problem. Like,
Yeah.
grace is the best thing that church has going for it.
Exactly.
And it sounds weird. How do you hold these in tension? How do you talk about commitment and preach about grace at the same exact time?
Right.
Do you have an answer to that?
I don't know if I have an answer to it, but I do think there is something about commitment that parents will catch on to.
Yeah.
That a commitment to the church is going to put something in their kids' lives that's different than anything else can.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is really, as much as it is a part of who we are, it also maybe is a part of our marketing. We do have to let people know that your kids will get something different. And the challenge is what they're getting is not a guarantee that they will have the perfect moral life.
Right.
You know, and
No.
that I think was also a false pretense of the church at some point. There was this guarantee that if your kid went to church, they would never experience any kind of moral lapse or anything difficult happening in their lives. Instead, we should have been telling people that when this inevitably happens, there will be a structure that they can ground themselves on.
That's really good. I really appreciate that because I think that's a part. It will inevitably happen.
Right. And because that is the Bible. These are the Bible stories.
Right. That they're going to hear and be, even great King David had his
Exactly.
lapses in judgment. Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And the way to market what the church is trying to offer to people.
Right.
Because but how do you think people, this is kind of moving into the direction of the conversation where I thought we were going.
Yeah.
Why do you think people are moving away from church? Why are the trend lines going in that way? And is it related to the way that people think about church and the way that it gets marketed?
I think those are the challenges that most churches are looking at, because we still have out there this notion that churches didn't keep up with society.
Yeah.
Our music lapsed, and we didn't have the same music. Our preaching lapsed. We weren't relevant to where people's lives were. And some of those might actually be true.
Yeah.
That those certainly were real factors that happened. But I do think another part of it was that we took for granted as church leaders that people would understand what church means in their lives.
Yeah.
I think, and what's so difficult about that is we know what it means for our lives. And the assumption was that everybody else would understand it
Right.
without maybe taking time to ask people the really difficult questions about where are the challenges that you're facing.
Yeah.
What does, and part of it is we're asking the question, what does church do for you? But maybe we really should just be asking the first question, where do you need God? Because we can also water it down to what kind of spiritual grounding do you want?
Right.
That can open up to so many wide things. I do think there is a question, where do you need God in your life
Yeah.
today? And then to find out, can the church actually remind you that God is there.
In your experience, is that, I mean, right, like you're still here and part of church because in some way it did that for you?
Oh, I think absolutely it did. Throughout my life, there was always a sense that there was a sense that God was present, even when spirituality wasn't.
Yeah.
And so that was a part, though, of my upbringing. And again, as we know, it's been part of our profession. And so it makes it easier not to be pulled away from it. But we both had experience in our lives where no one was forcing us to go to a Sunday worship service, at least. When I was connected to the seminary and then when I was connected to Capital University, there were Sunday mornings where I had no commitment to be at worship. I don't think in that 11-year period, outside of traveling or, being away on vacation at a time or something like that, but on a typical Sunday morning, there's probably not more than a handful of them in 11 years where I still wasn't in worship, because there was something there that I understood would create meaning for my life, and not just my job, but create meaning for my life.
Yeah. So, and keep going on that, because you said before that you saw it as like the presence of God being different than a spirituality. Did I get that phrasing more or less right? And in the same sense, I think a lot of people see going to church as a spiritual practice. Right. So I'm curious just how you're compartmentalizing this in your head. That's interesting.
And I like what you talked about in your podcast before about that presence of community, the singing, the breathing, all those things I think are really important. Those are such dynamic ways to think about it. But there are times in my life where I haven't felt very spiritual.
Yeah.
And so there's this sense that we have to find a spiritual sense. And even the church is sometimes caught up in that language that you don't really have to go to church. I find myself being spiritual in the mountains or whatever. And what I would say is I experience God differently in a church community than I do on my own.
Yeah.
And so when I show up in a church community, that's where I'd say I experience God's presence, even if I don't feel very spiritual.
Yeah.
And so,
I get that.
People might find that a nuance, or they don't know the difference in it. But there is something about inserting yourself in a community where I realize that sometimes, in my world at leading worship or preaching, that there are times when I can bring a word of God to people, even though they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I would show up at worship. I'd show up at a church because I knew that God would be present, and it was important for me to be there. And even if it wasn't important for my own sake, I just assumed it was important for God's sake. And that was enough some days. And Mark Allen Powell talks about this really well when he says that he goes to worship because God is worthy of worship. And if we start there, don't expect, I don't go to church to expect to be spiritually filled. I go to a church to expect God to be worshiped.
Yeah, well,
and that's enough sometimes.
I'm glad you took that turn at the end too, because one of the things that I was wondering about, and I'm guessing you'd kind of give them this same answer, but like if you hear from someone who says, I don't experience God in worship, right? Because that's what you were saying. Like, I experience God differently in worship than on the mountains.
Right.
And I think that's a great point.
And I love them both.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's need and call for both of those experiences. And what I hear you saying too is that, like experiencing God in worship also might just be showing up and knowing that God is worthy of worship, and that's why you're there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if I leave after a day saying music didn't speak to me, the preaching didn't speak to me, and I didn't pay much attention to the words of liturgy, but I do know God was worshiped and God is worthy of worship, that was enough.
I've told this on the podcast before, and I think I told it to you too, but it was my experience going to my home church when I was visiting my mom while she was on hospice care. And I just need to go to church this morning. And I went and I sat in the back, and the music wasn't great and the preaching wasn't great. And it meant so much to me.
Right.
And I can't even fully explain it. But I remember I came back and I told you and Deacon Deborah that too. I'm like, maybe we don't need to try so hard. It is a good reminder for us as leaders too. Like, and we put so much effort and intentionality into everything we do at Bethany, and I really am proud of that. And it's also nice to like, yeah, grace abounds, right? Like God's going to work with this even when there's a typo on the slides or in the bulletin, or it didn't quite go the way we had planned it out in our meetings.
And in that case for you, that was a place of comfort and grounding.
Yeah.
And I think there's really deep purpose to that. And so for people who've been a long time in a church community, they'll really feel that. And some people will feel that if they've been away and all of a sudden they end up at a Rockies game and they're like, wow, I used to go to baseball games a lot. And they stop going.
Yeah.
And now they show up at a Rockies game and they just immerse themselves in it and they feel like, oh, this feels so good.
Yeah.
To be back to a place that had importance to me. And I think that what we need to create somehow in a church setting, a worship setting even, is how do you create something that feels like home for people who are new to it? And that I think is one of the challenges that we face is what drives or what will make people, one, come to worship if they hadn't really thought about it before. And when they're there, what will they experience that will let them say, wow, that felt like home, even though I didn't know what home was.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. I love the way you're framing this whole conversation, because one of the beautiful gifts of the Lutheran Church is the liturgy, which is
absolutely
thousands of years old. But my joke with the liturgy, you've heard me say this before, the only way you learn to love the liturgy is you do it for 30 years.
Exactly.
Like on its surface, and I think there's a lot in worship that is deeply intentional and like biblically rooted. There's so much behind why we do what we do.
Right.
But if you're new to it, you have no idea. And it's so ancient that it'll likely just go over your head and be like, this is weird. Like Gary, he's up there chanting, and he's in a Snuggie. Remember Snuggies? Blankets with sleeves. I think that's the real challenge for a liturgical church like ours, is trying to figure out how can we make this, like, because it is beautiful and it's such a gift, and it's not that we need to just throw it all out.
Right.
But we also have to be honest and say, and this doesn't feel like home unless you've done it for 30 years.
Exactly. Outside of the fact that sometimes you realize everybody around me is immersed in this.
Yeah.
So your first time at a professional baseball game, you may have no idea what Take Me Out to the Ball Game is, or what a seventh inning stretch is.
Right.
But all of a sudden you're standing and you're hearing the crowd sing and you're thinking, something's happening here.
That's good. Yeah.
That has some kind of importance to it. And so the next time you go, that happens again, because you might think that was a one-off. But you realize, and then you'll say to somebody, does this happen at every ball game? You know, professional, yeah, it doesn't happen at my church softball league games. We don't take a seventh inning stretch there.
Probably should.
We might. But you start realizing there's something here that's communal, that people have immersed themselves in. So I also think that not all we need to do, but something we can do as a way of creating importance is to let people know there are things about worship that might feel new to you, but look around, because they have enough meaning that we keep doing them.
Yeah.
And I think that is important.
Yeah. And I like that too. I think you're right that people will start to catch the vision for it. And I think in our world that just is so fast paced and you're just relentlessly bombarded with things to be worried about.
Yeah.
More so than generations ago.
Oh, I think that's clear.
Yeah. We talked about that the other day too. Just like we are just so exposed to all the tragedy and terror of the world.
Right.
And it's always been the case. Actually, this is one of the more peaceful times in human history, but we're just so much more aware of it because of the 24-hour news cycle, because of our access to information from across the globe in an instant. And living in that world is just relentless and difficult. And so how can we invite people into what the church has to offer is to help them understand and see God and experience God even in the midst of tragedy, pain, suffering,
Right.
and to hopefully find a place of peace and hope. Like, I think that's how would you describe it, actually? I mean, I've named the problem here, but how would
Yeah.
you say, like, what does church have to speak to that reality?
What we really need is faithful proclamation. We need people to be able to stand up and say God is present. And unfortunately, we as people of the church sometimes don't take enough opportunity to say God is present, not God is responsible. And there are plenty of people out there who would like to say God is responsible. And they'll use it to whatever advantage they want, whether it's socio-political or personal or whatever it is. They can use and when I say they, it's, that's always a pejorative term, but that some people will choose to speak for God in a way that I don't believe God would ever speak.
Right.
And so the church needs to talk about what does it mean for God to be present and not what does it mean for God to be responsible, especially when it comes to human tragedy. But we do hear it. At a certain time, it's, because that community accepted these people, or they, in today's world, you could say a community wouldn't allow the ICE people in. And so now that's going to be drug up when anything tragic happens in that town, or that community welcomed these people in or didn't welcome these people in. That's such a misuse of where God is. And in some ways, I think this is relatively new to how much airtime people get for those kinds of comments. I think people might have had those comments before, but nobody was putting them on the air. And now it's so easy to get airtime that as church people, and particularly as church leaders, we're catching up to what does that mean? How do we bring a message of God's love and grace in the midst of a world where just a few people can be the ones who dominate the air by talking about God's judgment and God's wrath? Because it's not the God we proclaim.
Right. So and yet I think what you're naming is a strong reason why so many people have chosen to move away from church.
I think it is.
Because they see the airtime all the time of, like, if that's what church means, if that's what Christianity is all about, like, I don't want any part in that.
Right. I talk to people all the time who will say what God is doing. And they'll say, how can you worship a God like that? And my answer is, I don't. Because I don't think that's what God is doing. Somebody has co-opted God's message in a way to serve them. I hope my greatest desire is to proclaim a message that serves God as God is, not in a way that I would want to mold God.
So then what do you think church, you've answered it a little bit, but I want you to get more specific. Like, what does church need to look like in order to meet people in these types of spaces? Like you were talking about helping people see that God is present, not necessarily that God is responsible. But how do you, how given how much airtime and everything else that happens out there, how do we position ourselves as a church that does that and shows itself in that way to people who are looking for hope and peace and a way to manage the chaos of 2025?
And I think part of that is to remind ourselves of why people still are here. So that's why I love the conversation you're having, is that the more that people can understand why people are still in communities, faith-based communities, I think that's really the strong point of it, because they will realize that they are listening to and turning around and responding to a God that is not a God that is depicted negatively in the media. They're responding to a God that is creating something new in their own spirit. And I do think that's why people come. So part of that for us is to remind people of why people are here. It's more challenging to convince somebody who has no reason to be in church why they should be here. But I think part of what we promote is why people are here, because they're here for really good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not all so filled with theological, doctrinal principles. They just know that somehow in their life, God is moving and making a difference.
Yeah.
And that really is the message of the church. It always has been.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as old as follow me, what Jesus shares with his original disciples. They didn't know why, but they knew they were going to make a difference somehow.
Yeah.
I got to believe that. I think Peter, Andrew, James, and John knew that when they chose to follow Jesus, that they were going to make a difference. Now, they actually knew what the next 3 years was going to bring. They might have said no.
Right.
But part of that is just coming along and seeing. So
I like that too. I mean, it's such a good way to frame what we try to do here is like, how can we create our programming in such a way that people can really see how it makes a difference?
right.
And I think that's what everyone wants. That's why you do anything, is it makes a difference. You send your kid to the soccer clinic and it makes a difference. And now she's a better player. Right.
Yeah. And you hope that she got friends along the way and other things happened and some kind of discipline and they were able to feel good about themselves. All those things is what you want.
And I think it comes back around to what we were kind of talking about earlier too, is that people come to church one time and they feel like it doesn't make a difference. They didn't experience God in this place, or it didn't immediately fix whatever they were struggling with. So what do you say? How would you respond?
I do this a lot with couples that I talk to as they're going to get married.
Okay.
Because I've learned that when people get busy in that stage in their life, there's so many of them say, oh, I've fallen away from church. And they're all embarrassed about it and all this. So I always tell them the story that when one of my cars was coming to the end of its life cycle, that I realized I was going to need to get a new car or get a newer car to me, and it was a used car. So I went to a dealership and I test drove a car. And I realized when I got in, the seat wasn't all that comfortable and the buttons were kind of in the wrong places. You know how the wipers can be on the right or the left, and where your lights were and where that little red triangle for your hazards was. Can you find that? And I drove that car and I got out of it and I went, it just wasn't very comfortable. And so I decided, you know what? I'm just going to walk everywhere. I'm not going to have a car after all. And they look at me like, really? And I go, no, I went and test drove another car. and then I got in
really
another one. And I was like, oh, it's like the steering wheel had the right feel to it and the buttons were in the right places and the seat adjusted in a way. And I got out of it and I went, that was really comfortable.
Yeah.
No, that's kind of like congregations.
Right.
Is that, try one and if it wasn't comfortable, decide that, oh, well, I guess church isn't for me. No, you find one that fits, because there is one out there that will fit.
Yeah. Yeah. And not that it's all about being comfortable all the time, but you're right. Like you do walk into a place and you're like, this isn't me. Right. Like this just doesn't fit. But you don't then walk everywhere rather than buying a car. Yeah. That's a great analogy. That's a really great analogy. So with all this too, though, Gary, why do you think you ended up, like, I know you grow up going to church and you're from a family that really prioritized all of this. What do you think it was about it that made it really click for you as something that you wanted to consistently keep as a part of your life? Obviously, this is well before you went to seminary.
Right. Yeah. And so I've told this story quite often that, I grew up in a family of four, one sister who at that time in the church couldn't be a pastor. So she kind of had the free pass. But then of three boys, when you see them in church every Sunday, everybody kind of said one of them has to be a pastor. That was just sort of the realm I lived in those days. And as I went along, there was just something about participating in church that to me was really formative. To serve as an acolyte, to me, it felt like an instrumentally important role that I had in the church. And then in my church, as you got a little bit older, then you could serve as crucifer. You could carry the cross in. And that to me was just that just felt like a milestone that was so important that somebody would deem me worthy of carrying in the cross and recessing with it. And so there were people along the way that said to me, "Oh, you should think about being a pastor. You should think about being a pastor." And, of course I was going to. I was in church a lot, and not just on Sundays, but, volunteering in confirmation classes. And then I tell the story of one day when I served as crucifer, walked in with the cross. I walked out of it, and a lady in the congregation who'd been a good family friend and all that came up to me and said, "Every time you participate in worship, it makes me so happy." To me, that was like a flipping point for me about what it would mean to actually serve in the church.
Wow.
And so I tell people all the time, if you think somebody would be a good pastor, don't say to them, "You should think about being a pastor." Tell them how they make you feel.
Yeah.
It was her saying, "Every time you participate in worship, it makes me so happy." In my life, I thought, well, I kind of want to make people happy. I'm really committed to the church. Serving the church seems like a natural way for me to live out that what I really want deeply.
Yeah.
And what's funny is people go, "Oh, well, then you must have been, such a natural speaker and all that." I was terrified to stand up in front of people. And that never entered into my head about what it would mean to be a pastor, to be able to do that. But somehow that kind of worked out, and I worked through that.
I just think it's funny that right, this woman says, like, when you do that, you make me so happy. And as we well know, like, being a pastor is hearing how upset you've made people all the time.
Right.
Not all the time, but
all the time,
it's a big part of the job.
So that was really my coming. And then once I decided I was going to be a pastor, then other parts of my life fell in place. And I didn't feel like I had to be special or set apart in any way, but I wasn't shy about letting people know that either, that was what I planned to do with my life. And, and I look back now and I think it's worked out well for me and my family, and I hope the congregations I serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing about our work, is that it's really rewarding and really unique. And it's a really, I mean, people complain in every job. Like, it's such a good job. That's the thing that I keep coming back to when people ask me about, like, what's it like? I'm like, it's so good. Like, it's just it's so unique, and it's so different every day. And there's so many, like, facets to it that are just, I don't know. I don't know how you feel about it, like, at this stage in your career, but that's where I'm at with it too. I'm like, there's nothing like it in all the world, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
I don't come across many professions that have the same, I don't even know how to, not the same responsibilities and so forth to it. But maybe it is in a way the same responsibility to it, in that no matter what day you have, no matter the joys, the challenges, the responsibilities, is that it really comes back to that same idea of, why would I go to church on a day I really don't feel like it?
Yeah.
And the answer is because God is present there. And so that is maybe one of the differences I do get to say about my job. No matter what happens, when people are happy, when people are upset, when people are apathetic, no matter what, God is still present.
Yeah.
So being able to be in a job where I get to be reminded of that daily, that is something that I think is unique and special.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the diversity of ways that you're reminded that God is present,
point,
right? Like, because it's not just in worship.
No.
It's also Bible study. It's also premarital counseling. It's also funeral preparations. Yeah, there's so much to it. Yeah, and there's nothing like it. We both worked at seminaries. You should go to seminary. If you've been thinking about it, this is your sign.
God is present.
Yeah. So yeah, if you had to kind of, you paint a really good picture of your experience growing up. Why, if you had to like really summarize it in something kind of succinct, a nice soundbite for us.
Yeah.
Why are you still here? Like, why is church still important to you?
Yeah. I think church is still important to me and this would come from more of a mainline perspective. So I think other denominations or non-denominational churches will have a different bent on this. But what's so important to me is that I walk into a worship space and there's an altar there. There is a place where God offers the very presence of God to me.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I don't think I'll ever get over how humble I feel, whether I'm standing at the altar presiding
Mm-hmm.
or whether I'm simply walking up and receiving the sacraments,
Mm-hmm.
is that there is a place where I can always know that God chooses to do something for me.
Yeah.
And I think that might be the most succinct way of saying, why am I still here? It's because God still desires to give me something freely. And I can't imagine a life where I wouldn't want to be in a place to accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or where you'd want to miss out on that. Yeah. To not be participating in this freely given gift
Right.
week after week. And it ties so well into kind of our earlier part of this conversation about like, as the world, it just seems so overwhelming at the moment to receive that week after week, that reminder of God's freely given presence with us.
Right.
I mean, I remember and a friend growing up who was talking about receiving communion, and he said, he's like, every week after I receive it, I just take such a deep sigh because it's like, okay. And it's always stuck with me. And I feel like I've adopted it for myself in a lot of ways too. Just like, like something bigger than my current little problems just happened here.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that is I've realized part of my own spirituality is centered around generosity. And so church is also the place where I can freely give.
Yeah.
And I think that draws me closer to God.
Mm.
I think God provides an altar where the very essence of God, the presence of God is freely handed over to me. And God provides a vehicle for me to freely hand over some of my resources to the church or to any God-pleasing ministry.
Right.
And that really is an opportunity. That I've never given an offering that has taken something from me.
Yeah.
Every time I give an offering, it gives something to me.
Yeah.
And so I think that really the church is still one of those few places where you are given over and over and over again. You're given grace. You're given the sacraments. You're given the opportunity to draw closer to God through generosity. The church is absolutely filled with places for you to become more of who you are.
Yeah. And the fascinating thing is it's the only place where you don't have to pay a membership fee.
No.
Right?
Nothing's expected.
Exactly.
Right.
It is more out of your own sense of like being moved by all that's happening that you respond with these gifts.
Right.
But you think about literally anything else of all the things we've mentioned, the hockey, the ice fees, right? Like the soccer clinics, any of these things you mentioned, country clubs, all of it, there's always a membership fee. There's always a cost.
Right.
There's always an expectation of like, hey, this is what it will require of you to be a member of this space. And yet all those places have way more involvement, I would guess, than churches.
Interesting, right?
I don't know if that's true. It is really interesting of just like what in the human psyche these days makes that more appealing, or right? Like there's something interesting to explore within that. And I don't have a lot of answers. That's maybe a matter for another podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that we seem drawn to that when God is freely giving of God's self week after week.
Right.
It's like, well,
And part of that is, as human beings, we're so accustomed to thinking about what's the catch, or what is somebody really expecting of me. And you talked about it recently in a podcast about the bombardment of advertising that takes us. And it constantly tells us that we're not enough.
Right.
And so then, I have 3,000 messages in a given week. that tell me I need something to be enough. And then I got one that told me that God loves me unconditionally.
Yeah.
That's a hard message to break through the other 3,000.
And not every church is giving that message.
That's true too.
A lot of churches, that is a place you go to hear again that you're not enough.
Yeah.
Just in different ways.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
That's
It's hard for people of grace to understand that that's the essence of God, to hear God spoken in terms of, if you stay here long enough, if you're here, that this congregation or this community can fix you and make you worthy in God's sight.
Right.
Rather than, I come because I already know I'm worthy in God's sight, and therefore I want to be where that message is proclaimed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And why amidst this flood of negative advertising, you're not enough, why wouldn't you want to at least like have an hour a week where you can hear something different? Like that's my sense of this, to tie it all together too. Well, hey, anything more you want to say to our listeners? Because it might be another 3 years before I get you back on.
Maybe this is that there are people who go to church because they need the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they don't even care how simple or how profound the answer is. They just want an answer.
Yep.
Bethany's probably not a great place for that.
Yeah.
But if you come with questions, we absolutely will deal with those.
Right.
And so that's another part of, deciding what kind of car you want to sit in.
Yeah.
Some people want to sit in a car that has a lot of gadgets that do a lot of the work for them. And a lot of people want to do the work themselves, and they don't want to feel like
they want manual transmission.
That's right. My first several cars were manual transmission. I loved it. But there are places that will give you the answers if that's what you need.
Yeah.
And there are places where your questions will be so warmly accepted, and you won't be given necessarily answers to your questions, but you'll be given an opportunity to explore your questions.
Yeah.
And to me, exploration is far more life-giving than asking a question, getting an answer, and moving on.
Yeah.
So I think also what continues to keep me coming back and keep me interested is that I still have questions. And there are people who are going to be thoughtful about my questions, even though they don't want to answer them.
Yeah.
But they want to still engage them.
Yeah.
I really hope that what we can do as a church like Bethany is engage people's questions. And then if answers come, an answer that comes through engagement is so much better than me just giving them an answer.
I agree. Yeah, exactly. Like the journey is more important than the destination a lot of the time.
Sometimes that can definitely be the case.
And we all learn so much more along the way through the engaging, the sharing of questions than if it's just like, no, like, hey, stop asking that. This is this is the way it is.
Right.
Right. Yeah. The more of that we can do. And I think we do a good job of trying to create space for that in a variety of settings.
And one thing we know is that people who left the church left because they didn't have engagement.
Right.
And, part of that is...
And participation, like your story about how formative the participation piece was for you, I think is really instructive.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. It's just like you get out of it what you put into it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, church is not a passive activity.
Yeah.
It's not. And letting people know that and engage in it, I do think is an important part of what we continue to do. So that really does continue to bring me back.
Yeah.
Just say, why do you still go? Why after all these years do you still go? Because it's still engaging.
Yeah.
That might be the very, very simple answer, but it is what brings you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's always more to do, more to engage with. Well, Pastor Gary, thanks.
Pastor Nick.
We should do this again much sooner than the long hiatus. It was not intentional. I apologize. I apologize to the listeners. He's really good. We should get him on more often. Thanks for being here, being a part of this as always. And thank you, dear listeners, for listening. Stay in peace, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Together for Good podcast. If you'd like more resources for your walk of faith, please visit our website, bethany-denver.org or download our mobile app by searching Bethany Connect in your phone's app store.